We're always told we can't believe everything we read in the papers or what we see on TV or online. But on April 1st, there's always a priceless story that's so outrageous that most of us are convinced that no one can ever make this stuff up. And then comes the sucker punch at the end when the prankster goes, "April Fools!" But if you're the unwitting victim of one of these clever hoaxes, don't worry, millions of others were probably duped as well. So here are the 10 biggest April Fools the entire world fell for. We thought it fitting to start this list with one of the greatest April Fool's pranks ever. This one involved World News Authority, the venerable BBC. Yes, the same BBC that takes a hard-nosed approach to current events and delivers it all up with that patented British stiff upper lip. But back in 1957, they decided to have a little fun in what's been recognized as one of the first April Fool's Day jokes to ever air on TV. On one news program that day, 3 minutes of airtime was given to one story about a bountiful spaghetti crop in Switzerland. The harvest was described as one of the biggest in history due to a mild winter and the elimination of a predatory insect called the spaghetti weevil. Cameras rolled as one family gently removed pasta draped over trees and put into baskets. That prompted audiences worldwide to call the BBC for information on how they could get their own spaghetti trees. BBC personnel suggested that they put a sprig of spaghetti into a can of tomato sauce and hope for the best. Another prank that got international headlines, this time in the sporting world, involved a soccer game between two international teams. Back in 1951, after soccer regular seasons were over, a football club from Sao Paulo in Brazil was doing a tour of Europe playing against various home teams. One of those stops was in Milan, Italy. The Sao Paulo team was heavily favored given that some of them had played on the Brazilian squad that made it into the World Cup final the previous year. Milan was hopelessly overmatched. So imagine the surprise from fans listening all over South America when Milan beat Sao Paulo 4-0. It was a game dominated by penalty calls by the referee, almost all of them favoring Milan. The outcome resulted in outrage over the fact that the northern Italian team had destroyed one of South America's most formidable teams, but that game broadcast via Radio Pan America never took place. Instead, it was pre-recorded in the garage of the station owner, long before Sao Paulo's European tour ever began. When the station announced the next day that the game was a hoax, some fans were relieved that their favorite team was never upstaged. It was no joke to the citizens of Paris back in 1986 when they leafed through the April 1st edition of Les Parisiennes to see one story jump right out at them. The exclusive news item declared that their beloved Eiffel Tower was about to be dismantled and relocated to a Euro Disney theme park outside of the city. And what was going to replace the tower? Why, none other than a 35,000-seat stadium that was going to be the centerpiece of the 1992 Olympic Games. The very notion that such a worldwide attraction would cease to exist in the heart of Paris was sacrilegious to most of the locals. This was a tower that was only 3 years shy of celebrating its 100th anniversary. And since its debut in time for the 1889 World Fair, which was to commemorate the French Revolution a century earlier, the Eiffel Tower was more than an iconic structure. It was the very symbol of what it meant to be French. Besides, according to most skeptics, the tower was extensively renovated in 1982, which meant that dismantling it and moving it would have been a big waste of improvements. Speaking of monuments, One of the biggest publicity hoaxes of all time struck at the Patriot heart of America. Theory and anger erupted from the red-blooded, apple pie-munching Americans when word got out about a full-page ad that appeared in the Philadelphia Inquirer back in 1988. In the space of fast food outlet announced that it had purchased the Liberty Bell from the federal government and was going to rename it the Taco Liberty Bell. The very thought of a cherished US relic becoming commercialized outraged some Americans. The reaction across the country was as swift as social media, which hadn't even been invented at that time. Radio talk shows were flooded with calls from irate listeners over the ad campaign. News networks scrambled frantically to uncover the truth behind the deal. National Park Services, which is also responsible for the bell, was also on the receiving end of several angry messages. In the end, Taco Bell was the big winner, generating tons of notice. Fortunately, after revealing it is nothing more than a hoax, the company donated $50,000 to maintenance of the legendary cracked bell. Then there was one structure responsible for keeping time that was allegedly going to change with the times. That was essence of an April Fool's story delivered in 2015 by one of the more sensational newspapers in London. This was when astonished Londoners choked on their tea and crumpets upon reading the news that Big Ben was going digital. Yes, you heard it right. The story goes that the iconic clock tower perched atop the Palace of Westminster would be getting its rotating hands replaced with a more rectangular digital clock face. The reason behind it was due to inconsistently dropping tourism levels and realization that younger generations had no idea how to tell the time the old-fashioned way. With alleged approval from the National Society for British Heritage, plans were already being drawn up for renovating the giant 160-year-old timepiece, which would also replace its legendary chimes with a series of beeps. Then every evening at 10 o'clock, the clock would broadcast a 5-minute newscast loud enough to be heard 10 miles away. That was more than enough for the Brits to tolerate, who publicly protested the decision. Other sane minds recalled a similar hoax that involved the Big Ben being moved to the site of the Olympic Games, which London hosted back in 2012. And then there were a few who realized what day it was. Monuments may have been a major source of April Fool's Day pranks, but there have been a few natural landmarks that have also been targets. And you have to admire the ingenuity of one person who in 1974 went to great lengths to spark the international reaction with an incident in Alaska. America's 49th state is home to the northern tip of the Rocky Mountains, some of which were once volcanoes. One volcano was Mount Edgecumbe, which has been dormant the last 4 centuries. But that didn't stop a prankster named Oliver Becar, who tried to see if the peak could stage a comeback of sorts. It took a great deal of heavy lifting on his part to make his prank become a reality. He had a friend who operated a helicopter fly about 70 used tires as close to the crater as possible. Becar and a few friends also took with them some rags, kerosene, and a few smoke bombs. Once the tires started burning, the people in the nearby town of Siska noticed some smoke billowing from the crater of Mount Edgecumbe and alerted the Coast Guard about the sign of possible volcanic activity. Meanwhile, mainstream media also started jumping on the story. Fearing the worst, a Coast Guard chopper investigated the landmark and upon arrival noticed something else that Becar had left behind. A giant 50-foot message that read, "April Fools." Another prank based on natural influences was more worldwide in scope and potentially apocalyptic. Because of the scale of this next prank, it required the services of the BBC to be in on the joke as they broadcast what was to be an outer space phenomenon that could be experienced by the entire world. In 1976, British astronomer Sir Patrick Moore made a startling announcement live on the air. 2 planets in our solar system, namely Jupiter and Pluto, are going to align at a particular point in their respective orbits. That in turn would cause an unusual gravitational pull on Earth. In some weird way, Moore's announcement made sense. After all, Earth's tides are caused by the gravitational pull of the moon. And if the moon could exert that much influence, chances are 2 planets could affect our home world much more severely. Following that logic, Moore stated that at 9:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, Pluto was to disappear behind Jupiter, causing Earth's gravitational field to weaken. The best way to experience was for everyone listening to jump at the same time. Right after the show, the BBC switchboard lit up with one Dutch listener claiming she literally found herself floating in the air, a sensation shared by other callers. One person complained that he bumped his head on the ceiling. In the end, it was hard to tell what was more entertaining. Was it the hoax announcement or accounts from everyone who thought they felt something that was never there to begin with? Weird doesn't even begin to describe this well-thought-out prank that hit the public park in 1955, and for a good reason. There was enough for the world to be afraid of back then. From the continued development of dangerous weapons to the rise of Russian communism after the Second World War. The war was a hub of military secrets among all the countries involved in the conflict. But if you captured a lot of attention, particularly one story about the creation of Contra-Polar energy, in 1955, news about this unusual form of energy was declassified and was first reported in an edition of Popular Electronics magazine. The story revealed that Contra-Polar energy was a unique twist in physics in that it involved negative energy. In this case, a lamp that was turned on would display darkness rather than light, or a stove using this energy would make food colder. Because Popular Electronics had a very dedicated audience that trusted the credibility of its writers and editors, most readers of the publication believed the story. Many even wrote into the magazine asking why such energy would be available commercially. It took several months of editorial stories to finally convince its readership that the whole story was a hoax from the start. Another magazine that discovered how notoriety could boost its circulation was Sports Illustrated. Long before it blended lengthy essays on athletic personalities with an annual swimsuit issue, the publication was always on the lookout for unusual stories, and it had won a courtesy of legendary writer George Plimpton, who wrote a lengthy piece on Sid Finch, a virtual unknown in the baseball world who was about to sign with the New York Mets in 1985. To pull off the joke, Sports Illustrated needed the help of the Mets. They hired a 6'4" man named Joe Burton to portray Finch. Players were asked to look intimidated in his presence to add a bit of drama to the story. His prowess on the mound was exaggerated, especially when team management got back catcher Ron Reynolds to wince in pain after catching a Finch fastball. Media who attended the training camp were sold on Finch, as was the Mets fanbase that was convinced that a future superstar had arrived. The hoax was so well planned, which was documented by Plimpton in Sports Illustrated, that it took days before fans realized that they had bought one of the greatest media pranks in sports history. One final story looks at one fake event that's found new life on social media. The prank was originally designed to be a joke by creators of the website ThinkGeek.com. The story goes that unicorn meat was a product from Radiance Farms. That was where nuns nursed unicorns by feeding them candy and massaging them with Guinness until they were mature enough to be made into food. Apparently, the meat was blended with crushed remnants of a mythical animal's horn for extra crunchiness. The advertised spam was nearly for show, as anyone who purchased a can of $9.99 found a stuffed toy unicorn inside instead. But for those who never bought the product that went on sale on April 1st, 2010, immediately got the joke. For the rest of you stumped over the humor behind prank, here's a hint: unicorns aren't real. And that's all for the 10 biggest April Fools the entire world fell for. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.